Welcome to Turtle Talk. This is Morgan's story and the family's journey. I'm Craig, and
I'm Michelle. Welcome. Okay, so when we last talked, I think it was episode 5 was me. We were talking about leaving the hospital and going to a rehab center for Morgan. Uh, so my mom had flown with Morgan in the medical plane, which was pretty cool. Um, and we drove down down south, and we got there and we picked up my dad and we got to see the plane land. And we watched him get Morgan off the plane and put her in the ambulance. And then we raced over to the rehab center. That was pretty nerve-wracking because here's this big, intimidating place we've never been to. And of course, we drove a lot faster across town than the ambulance did with her. And we're waiting, and we go in the door, and they're like, "Oh, you must be Michelle and Tom, and Morgan is en route." I mean, they knew the communication between the ambulance and them was great. I mean, they had it down to within a minute of when she'd arrive, and they brought us in, and took her right to her room. And of course, every new place is a little scary and intimidating. And then all of a sudden, there's all these people in her room, nurses and stuff, and the director of nursing and the insurance lady and the administrator of the transitional care unit. And everybody's like, "Welcome, welcome." And we're like, Well, but they were all very kind. Even the priest from the center came. He was sweet. There were a lot of people that came and a lot of introductions, and we're trying to remember this stuff, and everybody's just in a flurry, kind of getting Morgan all settled and getting her in her room, and then our case manager came in, and we have a long conversation about here's what we can expect. Tell us about Morgan. Tell us the things that she enjoyed, what she didn't enjoy. And then, like, one of the higher ups in the therapy department, she came in and, here's how it's going to be and stuff. And okay, we understand. And then here's this board, and they write her name, and here's her room number, and here's Morgan's goals. And I mean, it was such a whirlwind because we went from a very quiet, serene hospital setting to, I felt like I was flying through a tornado and, catching all this stuff. People were very kind, coming in and stuff. And it made it a little less overwhelming. So they got her all situated. And for the rest of the day, it was kind of a flurry of people in and out. My parents stayed for a while. Um, it was just the unknown. The
right,
unknown of having her in this new facility was scary.
all
Very
new
scary.
routine.
All new routine. All new routine. Um, and then, I got to back up to when we were at the trauma hospital. Uh, Once we had picked the location where we were taking Morgan for a rehab, um, a friend of mine called me and said, "What's your guys' plans for lodging while you're there?" And I guess, we had kind of talked about it. And we thought, well, maybe we'll get a camper. And we had gone and looked at a camper one day while we were still at the trauma hospital. We snuck out to go look at a camper, and we thought maybe we could just stay in that on the lot, but there weren't hookups and things like that. So that too makes it very difficult. And so my friend had called and she said, "Hey, my brother has a house there that he's not staying in, and you guys can use it." And it was like, thank you, Jesus. Because we didn't know what we were going to do, and we didn't have the money. That was the other thing. We didn't have the money to pay for a hotel or even a long-term hotel or an apartment or anything like that. And you have a big town. How far away do you want to be? And this house was perfect because it actually wasn't very far away. It's like 2 miles, maybe, tops. It took 5 minutes to get to the hospital from this house.
Right.
So my parents had gone to check that out, and, we kind of just tag team that evening, getting things set up and situated. And wow, I mean, it was overwhelming. It was very, very overwhelming because there's a lot of unknowns. We're going into a stranger's house to stay, and oh my gosh, you always kind of feel invasive,
Right.
in other people's lives when you borrow their house, that here's all their personal belongings and stuff, but it was really good. I mean, it was great. This gentleman was so fantastic, and as was my friend, his sister, and it just, boy, that just lightened a lot of load. Because Tom and I at that point, you can't run 24/7 without sleep.
Right.
And towards the end of our time at the trauma hospital, we had a room at the family lodging place, and we'd stay with her until she finally fell asleep, and then we would go over and sleep for a little bit and then come back. But in that time, that bed did not get much use because I couldn't stand the thought of being away from her, because when I had left her before,
Right.
look what happened. And so my fear was, if I'm not with her, I can't protect her, even though she's in a facility where she's safe.
Right.
Right. And, so all these emotions and craziness are running through. And so we make it through the transfer, and we make it through the first night. The next morning, holy mackerel, they were in at the crack of dawn, and they're like, okay, time to get her dressed. And we're like, what? I mean, really, it was kind of shocking, because they were like, listen, if you don't get up and get dressed every day, what's your motivation? And I thought, wow, that's really neat, So, they got her up and got her dressed, and we had a big therapy evaluation. Here's our plan. Here's what therapy's going to look like. And they would come in, and they'd hang the schedule on her dry erase board. And we knew exactly what time therapy was and what location and who the therapist was, because it kind of changed with some of the therapies. Some of them they tried to keep the same unless they were gone on vacation or something. But it was definitely like fast forward in high speed.
Yeah.
Because we went from being calm to this craziness. So, day one was, okay, let's get everything set up, and this afternoon she's going to therapy. And it's like, holy moly, I guess this is what we fought for.
Yeah.
And they got her out of bed, out of her chair, and here you go. You're sitting on a therapy mat, and we're going to start with stretches and things like that. And it was kind of like, be careful with her.
Right.
I was really freaking out at first, because it's
She's
like,
fragile.
she's fragile. Don't break her, and it was a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
Very unnerving, even though these are the professionals and they know what they're doing, and this is okay. But I, as a mom, and Tom as a dad, were like, we just have to trust. We have to have faith, So speech was in right away. Like, here's our plan. We're going to try, ice chips. We're going to try this. We're going to try that. Let's see if we can do some tracking with the eyes. Morgan veered pretty hard to the left. because of her injury and stuff. So her eyes were way to the left, and she had this, you know, she had this like glaze to her. I never quite understood, and I still don't to this day. But looking back at pictures, like if you go to the givemorgan.org, there's a tab that says photos, and you can go in, and I chronologically ordered them. So you could see her time in the ICU, and then you can see her time at the rehab hospital. And you can just kind of see that glazed over look where you're like, is she really comprehending and understanding? And, you can see the hand curls and you can see the foot issues. And, I just, that was hard, And so they take her to therapy, and she's got this like kind of glazed over look. And it's like, okay, is she getting anything out of this? Is she responding? And then things would start happening, like, let's use the kid toys, flashing lights and spinning things, and try and get her to follow them and stuff. And, so they had started setting up, and I think initially they were just trying to test Morgan's senses, like, where do we get responses and where don't we? How much muscle does she still have? I mean, now, mind you, she was laying in the hospital from June 18th until, August 4th or something, right around there, before we went to the rehab hospital. So that's a long time to lay in bed and do nothing. So
Right.
your muscles deteriorate. You kind of waste away a little bit. So now we have to rebuild all these muscles. And at the same time, because of her severe brain injury, we have to rebuild the brain. So what they started talking about, and sometimes I think different professions forget who they're talking to. And sometimes I really truly appreciate the crayon method. Draw me a crayon picture like I'm two,
Yeah.
and explain it to me that way. Because they were talking about all these different terms and stuff. So what I found is, like, that whole first week, I'm writing down different terms that they've used or different therapy things that they would say. So then that night I could sit and research them,
Yeah.
and so, day one is passed. We're into day two. They're doing all these evaluations. And then therapy was typically done by like 3:30 for pretty much everyone inpatient. That was kind of the feeling I got. I don't know how legit that was, but that was really the feeling I got, because I think it was like 4 o'clock or 4:30 every day. There was mass. They had a chapel in this rehab center, and there was Catholic mass every day of the week. And I thought, okay, faith has been our thing. There's a reason we're here, right? Like,
Right.
thank you for having this. So then we went to church. As soon as we learned that on day two, that there was mass, we're like, okay, we got to go to church. And that was kind of a blessing, because people from the outside could also come to mass there. So there were a lot of people. You had a mixture of people from the outside as well as patients. And it was an intimate little chapel, but there was just such a peace there. It was like, no matter how hard of a day Morgan had, we could just go sit there in peace. And it was calming,
You brought Morgan with you.
and I brought Morgan with me. Yep. They didn't want her laying around in bed any more than she needed to be. So like on day two, we got a wheelchair for her. They went and got one and got it fitted for her, the style that she needed and everything. And here we are. So, after on day 2 and we got things kind of situated and stuff. At some point, my parents left and it was just Tom and I. So then we spent time walking all the hallways and trying to kind of get our bearing. Where are we? What's available here? They had some beautiful meditation gardens with waterfalls. And we found that when we went and sat outside with Morgan by the water feature, that she just kind of had a calmness that would come over her. So that became our favorite place next to the chapel. That, those were our 2 calming places. At some places in the facility, they had big, huge aquariums with the coolest fish. And so we could spend time there, and just sit and watch the fish, watch the chaos going by, so there were some really neat features within the facility that after your crazy days, you could, they had calmed down in those areas. They had a pretty decent cafeteria, so it made things easy. It made things easy to be there. Tom and I spent some time, just wandering and figuring things out. And we were walking up and down one of the hallways and we look up and each wing had a name. And Tom looked and he goes, "Hey, see that?" And I said, "Yeah, what?" He says, "Well, remember the book that Father Velez gave us talked about Cardinal John Henry Newman."
Yep.
Well, he had a confidant whose name was Saint Jane de Chantal. And we were in the Saint Jane de Chantal wing of the facility.
Cool. Little things.
Little things. We bumped into somebody later on, and I'll get to their story later, but the thing they taught us was all these little things. The running joke was, wow, it's a God thing.
Right. Yeah.
It's a God thing. All these little beautiful steps. So, the routine was crack of dawn, they're getting her up, getting her ready, getting her dressed for the day. Therapy comes in. Each therapy takes her. It took a little adjusting, though, to kind of time it for some of her need,
Okay.
medications, things like that, because you really don't want to be in the middle of therapy when you need to handle some of these issues.
Right.
Right. So, we got things all worked out. The first week was a little chaotic for us. Of course, we came with lots of baggage, right? Because
And trust issues.
we had trust issues. We have attorneys.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of legal stuff going on in the background, right, that we're dealing with. So our lawyers are contacting these guys saying, "Here's the deal. These people they're not allowed, blah, blah, blah." It was, so we probably weren't very well liked showing up with huge trust issues, our attorneys calling and giving orders about, if this person or this person makes contact, nobody's allowed to talk to the family. They have to go through us. You have to help protect them, so we were kind of like the problem children, right?
Yeah. By no fault of your own.
By no fault of our own.
Yeah.
So it was kind of overwhelming trying to get everybody to understand this is why we are the way we are. I'm sorry about all our extra luggage. I'm sorry about the legal stuff, but this still is only about Morgan.
Yep.
Everything is all about her. Every step we take was all about her. So it just.
So first week there, what are your what's your biggest impressions of this new place and of what was going on?
I was very intimidated.
Okay.
Like I said, we have a lot of people in a lot of different professions, OT, PT, speech, the director of nursing, the head charge nurse. We have, there were so many people involved in this, and everybody comes in and they just start like we knew what they were talking about. Like I said, I need the crayon method sometimes, right?
Word vomit doesn't always help.
No. And so we're trying to learn these terminologies that they're using. Now, let's talk about the insurance.
Okay.
Right? So insurance approved us to go there. And like on day 2, the insurance lady comes in and she's like, okay, here's the deal. You're only approved for a week. I know. And so Morgan has to meet certain markers in order to get approval to stay for week 2. And I'm like, what? So now we have all this pressure on us thinking insurance is going to kick us out at any moment if Morgan doesn't meet these markers. Right? And we're like, this can't be happening. So now we have this looming over us, which is a huge worry because once again now we're feeling trapped. We're feeling like they're giving up on her before we even start because of the insurance factor. She's going to end up in a nursing home. I prayed so hard every day, baby, please. Come on, Morgie, you can do it. Just give me one little thing today, and so you can stay. Every day, that was the prayer, was, Morgan, please, baby. I know this is so hard for you, but just wiggle your finger when they ask, or whatever that was that they were asking you to do. Please, baby, please, with all your might, muster it up and do it. That was the biggest shock when the insurance lady came up and told us that it was 1 week at a time. So I called the lawyers all hysterical saying, what do we do? Because they're our lifeline. They're the ones who are Team Morgan. They're the ones who are going to help us navigate the issues, right? Because they saved us once. That was overwhelming. So our day in the first, from day 1, day 2 on, we'd get Morgan up, we'd have therapy, we'd have lunch, we'd have therapy again, we'd go to church, we'd go sit in the meditation garden, we'd go have supper, and then to her room. And she didn't actually get a whole lot of time in her room unless she was sick, and even then, if she wasn't super sick, like if it was just a cold, you're still going to go to therapy. Like there was no grass going to grow under this girl's feet,
Right.
which was great. The aggressiveness was pretty awesome. I really enjoyed the evenings. It was quiet. We had a beautiful view out of our room, nice grassy lawn, squirrels running around in the tree right out front, and we had a nice bay window that you could sit in, and it was the calm in the storm because this room was Morgan.
Yeah.
And it was our safe, So I was very, very thankful. The priest or one of the helpers would come around every single day, every morning while Morgan was eating breakfast, or at some point, usually in the morning, would stop and say a quick prayer with us, anything we can do to help you with, And I really love this priest. He was so sweet. He is so sweet. It was pretty beautiful because he said, like, in that first week, he came and he's like, she needs communion so she can be closer to God. And I said, well, can't really eat or anything. And he's like, no, we're going to get it. He would break off the tiniest little crumb and he'd get it in her mouth and he'd bless her. And that was his mission. So, by the time we finally left there, Morgan was taking a whole host for communion because he worked so diligently to keep her as close to God as he could. It was so beautiful. It's so beautiful watching him. It was awesome. So yeah, that was, so the kindness among strangers, um, therapy the first week was a little overwhelming for all of us, Morgan included, and Tom stayed for the first week and we were both there. And, then we thought, wow, we can't be here and leave our kids at home alone.
Right.
School's starting now, right? Pretty soon. School's going to start because we're in the beginning of August.
Sure.
Middle of August, they're going back to school. So we thought, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? I have a job that I was trying to work. I had a great assistant who handled everything, but we would towards the last, I don't know, 3 weeks, we would kind of alternate days there. So one of us could be at home or I could go to work, back and forth. And so that was a blessing. But then we go to the rehab center and now it's like, okay, I took a whole week off. I'm going to go back and go to work for the week and we'll do switches on the weekend. So we decided that in the first week that's how we'd probably have to do this. So one of us was always with the kids and one of us was always with Morgan. And then we'd flip so they would get time with mom, then they get time with dad. And, we really hyper focused on their needs. So when we were there at home with them, that's what we focused on. Even though our mind was with her, we focused on them. So I'm sure we spoiled them more than they probably should have been, but under the circumstances, you know what? They needed that. They needed to know that they were just as important as their sister.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I feel like maybe we failed them on that because we were so hyper focused on her and her topic of conversation was always the primary, So I really felt bad that we probably neglected them more than we would have had things been normal. But we're in this crazy new normal for the moment. So, yeah, we get to the end of the first week. We learned all these different therapies, met a lot of different therapists. Pretty overwhelming. Met some people at the church. And then I went home.
Okay.
And I cried.
Terrifying.
I bawled the whole way.
I bet.
I bawled the whole way. I felt guilty for leaving her to go be with the other kids. I felt guilty for leaving Tom because I'm the mom. I should be doing this, and the emotions it was horrible. I should own stock in the tissue company because the boxes of tissues I went through in the first 2.5 months was ridiculous. It just, but after the first week, we kind of got a little routine going. In that first week, we never felt like we could leave her, even though we had a place to go to. You know, we pretty much slept there that whole first week. And then, you know, like the weekends were great. Even though we're at the rehab center, there was no therapy on the weekends. So you could just lay back in the recliner next to her. I'd cuddle in bed with her, but, you know, you just hang out and regroup.
Yeah.
You go to church, spend time in the gardens, just killing time, you know. That was a lot.
We're on the first week, so I'm assuming that they you check the boxes for week 2.
By the end of the first week, Morgan had done a couple things that allowed her to stay another week. So, thank you, Jesus. We're on week 2. We're going to make it, you know. But that was, and then here we go on week 2. Now, this is Tom alone, and here they come with, okay, well, you know, we're going to submit to insurance, but there's no guarantee she'll get to stay. And that's a really crushing feeling to hear those gloom words,
Right.
you know. And, you know, and then they wanted a care team meeting. Well, now mind you, we are super apprehensive to anything that says care team.
Right.
Because at the trauma hospital, care team meant we're going to railroad you, stick her in a nursing home, and you're out of here.
Yep.
So when they said, okay, we need to have a care team meeting, and we're like, panic set in, right? Total panic set in because, oh my gosh, they're going to throw her out, and we just got here.
Right.
You know, so I don't even know. I don't recall how that whole thing went. Tom may be better spoken at that, you know, but it seemed like, I don't know, the first week is done. They've done a lot of evaluations. We're now into week 2. And part of us felt like they had low expectation.
Okay.
For Morgan's recovery. So now doubt is creeping in. Like, are we even going to get our baby back? Like, is Morgan going to be Morgan again? Or is this our new normal forever? Right? And when that reality hit, there wasn't enough prescription medication to take care of that. There really wasn't. Like, how do you handle that? You know, you're faced with my beautiful, vibrant, energetic, outgoing, bigger than life daughter is now in a wheelchair with a blank stare. And is this the new life? Is this what it's going to be?
Terrifying.
So all you can do is pray and fight for her and say, your expectations are not good enough. We want more. And I think that's kind of the point where we really said, we're going to push them so they push her.
Yep.
And good enough is not good enough.
Yep.
We want the moon.
Perfect.
You know?
Some of our audience hates ending on a cliffhanger, but we have to.
We have to. There's more to come.
That's awesome.
Thank you guys for watching. We really appreciate it. We love hearing from you guys, so keep the comments and the questions coming for us.
Yes. Love the questions. Please subscribe. Go to www.givemorgan.org or visit me at my real estate website, realtorcraigbertrand.com. And we always want your questions, comments, like, and share wherever you listen or watch.
Thank you.
Thank you.